Okay. So I wanted to explore some of the tensions between Genesis and science today. Um, they're not all in Genesis. There's other tensions between like Torah and science elsewhere. But I just wanted to start out with brainstorming. What are the kind of specific details where the tensions come in between Torah and science, at least between a literal interpretation of Torah and science?
The earth was created in 7 days.
Great. So Earth created in 7 days versus, I wrote it down. I want to say
Millions of years.
four. Well, yeah. So, I mean, the universe is like, I think it's 14.3 billion years, and the Earth is 4.5. Right. There's a couple other major ones just in Genesis. Anything else that you can think of that's a major tension between the account of Genesis and science?
Oh yeah, that science meant when it came from a monkey or
Yes.
evolved from a monkey, and then we were made from dust and his breath.
Right. Humans created from dust and breath,
Hmm.
and humans came from monkeys. Great. And are there any other glaring ones?
There's no mention of dinosaurs, but we know they existed.
Well, right. There's no mention of dinosaurs. I'm not going to put it in there because the Torah doesn't say dinosaurs didn't exist.
Right.
So I'm not putting it there as like a flat out contradiction. I mean, these are kind of the big obvious ones, but Noah's Ark, there's a kind of like, okay, how many million species were there, and could all those species have really fit on Noah's Ark? So to me, Noah's Ark is problematic.
Yeah.
Miracles are another one that people really have trouble with, right? Because the way we experience the world is that God doesn't step in and just suddenly alter the course of nature. But the miracles in the Torah, God steps in and alters the course of nature. So we're not going to.
We can't go back and prove that he didn't either, right?
Right. It's true. Although if the sun stood still, right, what would happen if the sun stood still? I don't know. Wouldn't the earth fall? Well, I guess if God can make the sun stand still, God can also make the earth not fall towards the sun. The philosophers had a real problem with it, though. So over the years, they saw the tension of this. So the earth created in 7 days versus 14.5 billion years is kind of what we're going to focus on. There's a principle in Judaism in general. We don't necessarily take the Torah literally, right? We don't always know what it means. And Maimonides has this principle in the Guide for the Perplexed, which he wrote in the 11th century. This is his book of philosophy. And his principle here is, if Torah contradicts science, then if you're sure of it, right? Like Matthew, I think you said, well, on the miracles, we can't prove that miracles can't happen. We just don't see them. Right. So his principle here is, if you can prove something's impossible, then it didn't really happen and you're misunderstanding Torah. So he says, we do not reject the eternity of the universe because certain passages of scripture confirm the creation. So he says, I do reject the eternity of the universe. I'll tell you why later. Such passages are not more numerous than those in which God is represented as a corporeal being. In other words, the Torah talks about God as a body all the time. It talks about God's outstretched arm, right? If you look at Exodus 7, verse 3, I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. Pharaoh will not heed you. I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgment. Obviously, and later on it says, all of Israel saw God's great hand. So obviously there we know we're not talking about the hand, but it's your hand that does stuff. And when we're talking about God's hand, we're talking about noticing God doing stuff, right? So we know that when it talks about God's hand, it's talking figuratively. We know the Torah employs figurative language. So what he's saying is like, if I have to interpret Torah figuratively than I do. If I can prove that the world, well, it's hard to get through to see. He says the incorporeality of God has been demonstrated by proof. So since I can prove God doesn't have a body, I know that to understand Torah correctly, when it talks about God's hand, it doesn't really mean a physical hand. Those passages in the Bible, which in their literal sense contain statements that can be refuted by proof, must and can be interpreted otherwise. So in other words, taking Rambam and the age of the universe, if we are confident that science proves that the universe is 16 billion years old, then according to Rambam, we have to understand the Torah in some way to be speaking figuratively. We can't take it literally. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, right, and and he's right? We all do this with God's hand. We all do this. We know it's not literal. So when God is talking about a day, well, maybe they didn't have a sense of a billion years, right? Maybe Moshe is talking to the people. You don't really have a sense of a billion years, 8 billion years, like a day. There's a verse in Psalms: 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that's just gone by, or like a watch in the night. Hi, Katrine.
Hello, so late. My Zoom was updating.
Oh, that's frustrating when that happens. You go to get on a Zoom and yeah. So I'm glad you're joining us. We just read a passage from the Rambam where he talks about this idea that if Torah contradicts reason, if I can prove something, then then Torah must not be, I must be reading Torah wrong. So when Torah talks about God's hand, it must not really be a physical hand because we know God doesn't have a hand. And so we're taking that principle now and going back to Genesis and saying, wait a second, maybe when it says a day, it doesn't literally mean a 24-hour day. So in the book of Psalms, it says 1,000 years are in your sight are like a day that's just gone by, or like a watch in the night. So I heard somebody give this explanation, and I'll share it. Oops, let me share it. Actually trying to map on the 7 days of creation, or 6 days, onto the billions of years of the scientific creation. So the argument goes, the first day, science describes the Big Bang, the Torah describes the creation of light. The Big Bang started as a big soup of photons. So yeah, it's actually, you could see it as a possible accurate. The second day, 7 billion years. So in this interpretation, each day, the first day is like each previous day is twice as long as in other days. So the first day lasts from 13 billion years to 7 billion years. The next day, 7 billion years to 3.5. Science describes these massive stars. The Torah describes the firmament in the heavens. 3.5, the third day, 3.5 billion years, pretty close, right? The Earth is 4.5 billion years. The microbes are 3.7 billion years. And the Torah describes ground and vegetation. So if the Torah is talking about this process, what's the vegetation here? Photoplankton. If you're trying to map this out, right? If the Torah here is really talking about the physical evolution of the cosmos, I couldn't. So 1.75 billion years, you're getting various kinds of animals, but sun, moon, and stars. I was having a hard time figuring out how this mapped. 900 million years. Well, you get fish, and that actually pretty much corresponds to what happened in 650 to 400 million years ago with fish. The fish came up onto the land 300 million years ago, which puts us right smack dab in the middle of day 6 when the land animals came up. And then you have human beings coming on the scene Here it kind of like falls apart a little bit because human beings came on the scene late day 7, not day 6. So that's one way to reconcile it, which I will say I don't love. It's a little sloppy. What do you guys think of this approach?
It's doable.
It's doable, right? It's doable. It's you kind of need to squeeze things, but it is doable. Another approach, by the way. Oh, I didn't tell my joke. Did I tell the joke yesterday? So
Yes, it was about, wait a minute. Yeah,
yes, yeah.
yeah.
But Katrine wasn't here, so I get to do it again. So Katrine, you know, the verse in Tehillim, Psalms says that 1,000 years in your sight are like 1,000 years are like a day in your sight. So this guy is praying and praying to God, and he says, God, I've heard this is the case. Can't you just, is this true that 1,000 years are like a minute to you? God says, yeah. He says, well, what are $1 million like a penny to you? God says, yeah. He says, so can I have a penny? And God says, yeah, give me a minute. So,
Oh, yes, a minute. Yes,
Um,
and it's 1,000 years.
another way to try to reconcile these, by the way, there's this book that it's called Genesis and the Big Bang, and he doesn't really do the math, doesn't really map the two. He argues that if a clock moved close to the speed of light for the 16.3 billion years, then in fact it would measure 24 hours because of time and relativity. And so he said that he claims that it's God's clock that we're looking at, and literally 6, 7, 24-hour periods. It is what it is. I don't personally love that approach, but it's doable. That's the first model. I have 2 more models I want to share with you. The second model is from Kabbalah. And is this right? So how many of you guys have heard of Kabbalah?
Yeah, yes, I have heard of it.
You've heard of it?
Yes.
Okay. So let me, how do I do play slideshow? View slideshow. Okay. So if you look over here, there's all these colorful bubbles. These are called the sphirot. And in Kabbalah, the idea is that God is totally transcendent and completely removed from the physical world. We are pretty much physical beings. And these are 7 energies that form the rungs between God's transcendent and the physical world. So they're different divine energies. The 7 lower ones, loving kindness, strength, harmony, victory, surrender, foundation, and manifestation. These 7 lower sphirot are the sphirot which are accessible to human consciousness. I think here they actually have 11, which is because any map of the sphirot either has this one or this one, but not both. So the 7 sphirot are these spiritual energies that flow through the cosmos. And the physical universe is a manifestation of spiritual energy into physical reality. Does that make sense? On what, like,
Yeah, yes.
the idea that like God is spiritual, God creates the world, which is physical. So somehow in that creation, we can see some process where this spiritual energy coming from God gets condensed into physical energy, which is us. So there are the 7 rungs between the spiritual and physical world. So if you look at the Zohar, this is a book that was written in the 13th century in Spain. And it's like the central Kabbalistic work. It says the world was created in 2 modes, by the right and by the left. When it says that, it means the right side of the tree, which is kind of positive, loving, generous, and the left side of the tree, which is more harsh and limiting and judgmental. This is called the tree of life.
Yes.
by 6 transcendent days. Okay, the world was created by 6 transcendent days. So in other words, it's saying the days are not describing 24-hour periods of time. The days are
Stages.
the, what's that?
Stages.
Yeah, there are these stages, there's these energies which were used to make the world, right? It doesn't say the world was created in 6 days, by 6 days. 6 days were fashioned to radiate, as it said, 6 days God made heaven and earth. So in other words, if you look at verse, his note in 606, the 6 days were themselves fashioned or emanated, and then heaven and earth. Okay. So in other words, right, the 6 days are describing these spiritual energies, not physical days. Another interesting source that from the same book, from the Zohar, okay. So this, to me, is almost describing a Big Bang. It is describing a Big Bang. Because remember, the Big Bang, you're going from nothingness and singularity to multiplicity. So how do you go from singularity to multiplicity? So the Zohar asks the exact same question. And here's how it describes it. With the beginning of the manifestation of the king's will. So the world started with some desire. God had some desire to start the world. We don't know what started the Big Bang. Nobody knows what started the Big Bang. So there was some urge here. That is, when the king desired to emanate and create the world, a hard spark made an engraving upon the supernal light. This hard spark, which emanated from the most concealed of all concealed things, took from the secret of the endless light, took a shapeless form. So it's shapeless, it's a spark. To me, this is pretty much describing the same language, what the physicists call the singularity in the Big Bang. Right, endless light, we have infinite light in one spark, all condensed into one spark. The spark was then inserted into the center of a circle that was neither white nor black nor red nor green nor any color at all. So at this point, it's pure energy. It hasn't been divided into wavelengths, into particles, into anything. When it began its measurements, okay, so now we're going from taking up no space, from 0 dimensionality to taking up space. It created colors that shone into the empty space in the engraving. From within the spark, this hard spark, a fountain spouted from which the shades down below received their covers. And okay. From the most concealed of all concealed things, from the secret of the endless light. So the endless light here is like infinite energy that's not in the physical world at all. Emanated 2 faces, one cleaved, one other did not cleave. I'm going to ignore that. Its atmosphere was unknown until forceful blows split Atik. So it split out and a concealed supernal point shone. So now we actually have energy coming into reality. Beyond this point, meaning before this point in time, nothing's knowable. Because of this, it's called by the name beginning, which means the first of the sayings. So, so in other words, the Zohar also is imagining this kind of burst of energy from God that becomes the physical world. Dina, were you going to make a comment?
I'm just,
yeah,
very interesting.
Yeah. So what I like about this, right, is it's like, well, what do you guys think of the Kabbalistic approach that days here refers to divine energies, not necessarily about how long creation took?
And different colors.
What's that?
It mentioned colors.
Colors, yeah. In other words, before this, there's no colors because we're going from one to the many. When you have pure energy, colors are separated, right? White is all the colors together. and then you put it a prism and you have different colors separated. So the endless light is not separated into colors. And in fact, I think at some point it calls it the spark of blackness because it's so bright we can't even perceive it. It's beyond human comprehension. What does the colors say to you? What do you see in that?
Spectrum?
What's that?
Spectrum.
The spectrum, yeah. The last approach I wanted to share with you guys. So this okay, and this may be this is from my studies for my PhD in philosophy. So Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant was a philosopher, and he had this idea that when we talk about when we talk about ethics, that's completely outside the realm of science. Science talks about what is, ethics talks about what ought to be. And therefore, science can never tell us anything about ethics. Science can never tell us anything about theology, that judgments about God have nothing to do with science, right? Science and religion are entirely separate realms. So Hermann Cohen was a Jewish student of Immanuel Kant. And here's the difficult reading that I'll explain. He saw, okay, science is what is, ethics is what ought, right? Science cannot tell you if it's good when a lion eats a sheep. Can't tell you if it's good. It's good for the lion, bad for the sheep. Doesn't tell you, is it good that the coronavirus, well, killed millions of people? Well, it was good for the coronavirus, wasn't good for us. Ethics is those kind of important judgments, right? It is good to bring peace. It's bad to kill. So Hermann Cohen here says, God is the ultimate ideal coincidence of what is and what ought to be. So in other words, God forms this connection and declares, okay, ethics gives us a vision for what the world should become, right? Because science here is the physical world. Maybe I should say this, physical world. God stands outside nature and ethics. So God is over here trying to connect the two. Because God stands outside nature and ethics, he points the rapprochement between is and ought, bringing about moral action in the world. So God kind of is this connection between the physical world and ethics, calling on us to make the world an ethical place. In other words, the Torah has nothing to do with science. So on this reading of the Torah, if we go back to Genesis 1, if you're Hermann Cohen, right? What does Genesis 1 say that is actually new? It's not about physics. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness sweeping over the deep and a wind from God sweeping over the water, God said, let there be light, and there was light. Let's just do English. God saw the light was good. God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and God called darkness night. There was evening and there was morning, a first day. What might Hermann Cohen say about this text? If it's not teaching us, right? If Hermann Cohen is saying this is a religious text, it's not teaching us physics.
That there should be light and darkness should be separated. So from an ethics standpoint, that's in what should be.
So it's good for there to be order in the world, right? That God as an advocate of order.
And balance.
And balance.
And also it says that the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep and a wind from
Yes.
God sweeping over the water.
So what might Hermann Cohen do with that?
He would say that should have been done later.
What's that?
that step would be done later.
Well,
But first,
in other words, Hermann Cohen, right, is saying that Torah is not a book of science. It's not a book of physics. It's a book of ethics and spirituality. It's a book that teaches us how to bring ethics and the world into alignment, how to make the world a spiritual place. Right? So how can we read this text and say, hey, this isn't about the physical history of the universe. This is about God's ideal vision for the universe. Right? And like you picked on unformed and void. Well, right, I think there's this idea here that God wants an orderly world, that this unformed and void is always threatening us, that chaos is always threatening us in the world. And God here creates by creating order, and that order is good, and so we should create by creating order. But was there anything else you were reading in that second verse, Katrine?
it sounded like they were talking about the the surface of the deep and a wind form, and then God sweeping over the water.
Yeah. Right. So you have to stretch it a little bit to say, okay, the Torah is doesn't really care about like some sort of physical event when God was sweeping over the water. Right? Because Hermann Cohen has to say, this is not really about how the world started. Right? Hermann Cohen says, science will tell us how the world started. It's 14.3 billion years old, started with a Big Bang. The Torah is not trying to teach us that. It's trying to teach us God's vision for the world. So it's a little bit of a stretch because you're right. It does give a very specific image of God sweeping over the water.
And it's not that big of a stretch, because in other places in Torah, we see there's poetry and prose used that make it where I mean, that would not be a difficult way to read this.
Right.
I mean, this doesn't necessarily have to be read in a literal sense.
Right. Like going back to what Rambam was saying. Right. The simple way of saying Rambam isn't literal, saying this isn't literal, is saying, okay, this is really referring to the first 7 billion years. Right. But then we have the Zohar, which is like, okay, this is referring to creating goodness, chesed, generosity. And then we have Kant, who's saying this is depicting God's vision for the world in general. Okay.
And there are concepts that are presented here.
Yeah.
That if you look past the words on the page, but the words are still there. I mean, you've got light and dark, good and bad, are represented here. Where, I mean, if you're looking for it, it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll show you another, skipping to day 6 in the creation of humans, which we mentioned before, right? We mentioned that if we look at this as science, it's problematic because humans don't seem to come from monkeys. They seem to have been created separately. So, but if we look at this as what's this teaching us about the spiritual nature of being a human, then it's an entirely different story. God said, let us make humankind in our image after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle of the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on the earth. And God created humankind in the divine image, creating it in the image of God, creating the male and female. So if this is not telling us about the physical creation of man, but about our spiritual nature and how we should be, what's it saying?
When it says creating humankind in the divine image, it doesn't mean that actually it's more of a reflection
Okay. And what do you think the
of
image
God.
is? Yeah. And what do you think the image is?
The energy,
What do you think that image is?
the image. Oh, let's try God.
How are we different than animals? Right? Because the
We
animals,
got
We have I'm sorry, go ahead.
we've got the ability to think,
We have the ability to
make
think.
decisions.
We have the ability to differentiate and choose between right and wrong.
Yeah.
To
So-
know what is right and wrong and to choose that.
Right. The ability to think gives us the ability to make moral choices, intentional moral choices, and to create, right, to decide what kind of person I want to be. Yeah. So the image of God here is not, right, 2 eyes, a mouth, hands. It's not that.
Because outside of that, outside of that factor, a human is really nothing different physically than another animal. I mean, we're mammals. I mean, we
Don't they
we
say,
have
like-
our own scientific genus, whatever, on the chart. But
Right.
what differentiates us from the rest of the animals is we have that ability to make those decisions and to have to know, or at least to have an idea of what's right and wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So this is telling us, right, what it is to be a human, how we should be as a human. The other part, right? They shall rule the fish of the sea. So what does that tell us about, right? Talking about our role as humans in the global ecology in the world. And then on the 7th day, this is something here. On the 7th day, God finished the work that had been undertaken. God ceased on the 7th day from doing any of the work. God blessed the 7th day and declared it holy, having ceased on it from all the work of creation God had done. So what words in here could science never say?
That there was an end to creation.
What's that?
End.
Oh,
Yeah,
you're saying scientifically nothing ever ends, it just always continues?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's interesting.
Creation is an ongoing process instead of a completed event.
Okay. I was looking at something else. I was looking at verse 2. There's a couple of words in verse 2 that absolutely a physicist could never describe in a scientific paper.
Finished?
No, it's
No?
blessed, right? Blessed,
Shabbat,
right? Blessed. God blessed the 7th day
Oh,
and declared it holy.
that's verse 3.
I'm sorry, my eyes are playing tricks on me. So I'm sorry, verse 3, right? So in other words, this idea of making the earth a holy place, of infusing it with blessing and holiness, is ultimately the goal of the 7 days of creation. And it's telling us that we should be making the world into a holy place. By the way, right, we're in the Torah portion of the week, we're reading about the construction of the Mishkan. The Mishkan the idea is you're constructing a place that can be a location where God's holiness dwells. And it's really a model for the whole world. And the week of creation is the same thing, that God makes the world 6 days, and then the 7th day, blessing and holiness. And so the message here is that our job as humans is to complete this, support the ongoing maintenance of the world, making sure everything operates right, and also to infuse it with holiness and blessing. So that's what I had to share. Wondering where you guys land, where it lands for you guys, if there's any solutions that you like more or less from what I presented.
pretty interesting. There's a lot as far as the time span. You got the metric version, and then there's the European. There's different ways of observing that, and then the whole clock about time. Yeah, and then the difference between the ethics and the scientific, it really can't be. I mean, I see it as, and that's a description of the proper way of how we should look at things. It kind of gives us a guideline.
Mhm.
on how to perceive between good and bad, right and wrong, and make those discernments based on just Genesis.
Right. And really, of course, the rest of the Torah is a continuation of that, right? Because the rest of the Torah is teaching us, okay, how do we make the world a holy place?
I was
Yeah.
I was raised to believe, I was taught by my parents and family that the world was created in 7 days or 6 days, and the world is like 6,000 years old, and that can't possibly be. Um, that's one of those things that sent me down this path to start with, because if that's not right, then what all else was I taught that wasn't right?
Right. Right. And this
So,
idea that, yeah.
but yeah, I mean, and then looking at it in this light, I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, you can balance the you can balance science and religion if you look at it with a grain of salt.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you guys for joining me. It's good to see you. And those of you, Matthew and Dina, I'll see you guys on Wednesday. And Katrine, I hope to see you again soon.
Yes.
I do, if people want to make a donation to Koalev in appreciation for the class, it would be great and helpful. And I'll see you guys.
Sure thing.
Thanks.
Already did the donation, so
Oh, thank you, Dina.
Yeah, so did I.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
bye.